It's 2026, 10 years since we had the referendum here in the UK on whether we wanted to stay a member of the European Union or leave it, doing what was dubbed a Brexit. I really struggled over this. What alarmed me was the shouty anger from both sides. I never believe anything that's shouted. And the fixed certainty alarmed me. Both sides were adamant that they were right and the other lot was stupid. Both sides read their preferred newspapers and repeated what they were told there. There was no debate. Each side just dismissed the others as liars and fools. I was tired of politicians blaming the EU for anything they couldn't fix. Yes, we'd like to improve this and change that, but EU regulations mean that our hands are tied. Was that real or just an excuse? Remainers claimed that only the EU could provide us the economic strength and stability needed to balance our interests globally, while Brexiteers argued that European economies were finished and we had tied ourselves to a corpse. Remainers insisted that Britain is too small to get fair deals with places like America, India and China, so we had to stay in partnership with our European neighbours. While Brexiteers pointed out that the EU can't ever make these deals as it can't agree on anything. Remainers imagined an ideal where European countries worked together to bring security and prosperity for all, while Brexiteers pointed out that we were handing over huge sums of money to be regulated and ruled by unaccountable officials. Remainers called Brexiteers Little Englanders, while Brexiteers said they wanted to engage with the whole world, not just our neighbourhood. No one could agree on how much the UK gave to the EU. One side quoted the gross amount we handed over, the other pointed out the net amount after we got about a third of it back in grants and so forth. Everyone understands the difference between gross and net, but both sides shouted that their number was right and the other was a lie. So I decided to do my own research and started with the EU's own websites. Now, the EU consists of 7 main institutions. Fun game, especially if you're a Remainer. Stop the video now and see how many of the 7 you can name. Well, here they are. Let's start at the bottom with the European Court of Auditors. Odd to call it a court when it has no legal powers. There was a story that it didn't sign off EU accounts because of widespread corruption. That may be a Brexiteer myth, as they have signed them off, at least since 2007, although I found it hard to tell whether they were signing off on the EU's financial management in a way which would satisfy me, or whether they were just agreeing that certain procedures had been followed. All rather opaque. Then there's the European Central Bank, which is part of the European system of central banks. They're meant to manage the euro, keep prices stable, and conduct EU economic and monetary policy. They seem to beat up on small countries which break the rules while being less militant with others. I suppose your faith in these bodies depends on your faith in central bankers in general to look after your interests rather than theirs. On the list, there's the European Council and the Council of the European Union, not to be confused with the Council of Europe, which is a different thing and not part of the EU. Also, you'll see the Court of Justice of the European Union. Now, that's not the same thing as the European Court of Justice or the European Court of Human Rights. What do all these bodies do? Well, if you're a Remainer, you should know as you voted for them. I suggest they all have grand offices, computers, well-staffed support functions, travel and expense allowances, and generous guaranteed lifetime pensions. And in return, we got, well, I don't know. What's left? The European Parliament sounds good. Citizens vote for them, so there is direct democratic control of all this government and bureaucracy. Well, yes, except although it's called a parliament, it doesn't initiate legislation on its own. It can only approve or reject proposals made by the European Commission. In other words, it's like the second chamber in a parliamentary system. It's the equivalent of the UK's House of Lords, not House of Commons. Not much democratic control after all. As far as I can tell, the equivalent of the primary legislative chamber is the European Commission. They are like the cabinet ministers of the EU government. Now, you can probably name members of your national government. You've seen them on TV being interviewed and held to account. How many EU commissioners can you name? Ever seen one being grilled on TV? Okay, here's the commission that was in place in 2016 when we had the referendum. The leader, Jean-Claude Juncker, was a former Prime Minister of Luxembourg, which must have been a demanding role. The population of his country was about 590,000, roughly the same as Leicester. What about the rest of them? Well, the Dutch guy, Frans Timmermans, in charge of regulation, seemed good. Strong career in the Dutch government. Agriculture and rural development was in the hands of an Irish former Minister of the Environment. Sensible. Health and food safety was with a heart surgeon and former Minister of Health from Lithuania. Okay, good. On the other hand, the British guy, Julian King, had never held an elected office. The vice president of the commission in charge of energy union had been a member of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia and then had a series of boondoggle appointments. He later tried to become president of Slovakia and failed. Not impressive. But the two that really caught my eye were Federica Mogherini and Tibor Navracsics. Now, Federica joined the Italian Communist Party at 15 and does not seem to have strayed from hardline Marxism ever since. Romain has pointed out that she was no longer in the Italian Communist Party, but that's only because it was disbanded in 1991 when European communism collapsed. Did she learn anything from that? Not clear. Her title, as you can see, was pretty grand. She was like the Foreign Minister and Minister for Defence. A commie, representing us to the world and defending us against hostile political opponents? Did you vote for that? But even more batshit crazy was the appointment of Tibor Navracsics, a leading member of Hungary's notorious Fidesz party. Now, I'm right of centre, but nowhere near Fidesz. They're ultra-nationalist. They're like Putin. They're very hard on migrants and have been accused of all kinds of nasty tactics. Terms like far right are bandied about all the time. Everybody's far right now. But these guys are the real thing. So what was their guy in charge of? You can see it there. Education, culture, youth and sport. Pretty important stuff. And the EU gave it to a guy who works for Viktor Orban. You didn't know? Why not? If you voted in the referendum, you should have known. Well, for me, it tipped the balance. I couldn't accept that. With some sadness, I voted to leave. Now, I should say, I love Europe. I've travelled widely. I worked for French companies most of my career, and I've been part of many international, mainly European teams. But when I told people I planned to vote leave, they said, "Oh, you're anti-Europe." Now, that just cemented my decision. I'm not anti-Europe. I'm sceptical about the benefits of the European Union. To talk of pro-Europe and anti-Europe when you mean the EU is to conflate countries with a political entity. Like in the Third Reich, if you were anti-Nazi, they said you were anti-Germany. In the Soviet Union, if you were anti-communist, you were an enemy of the people. making out that the EU is the same as Europe. Well, it smells of the same kind of thinking. A different kind of European arrangement might be fine. A simple customs union could work well. But instead, we've seen not so much mission creep as mission sprint. So I voted to leave. I knew there would be problems. I knew our politicians would muck it up. I didn't for a moment believe the money saved would go to the NHS. And I also knew the empire would strike back. The EU have to do all they can to make leaving look like a mistake, or more countries will follow us, obviously. Other countries will look at the UK and think, they're not being charged a fortune every week to be over-regulated, directed and fined. Maybe we'd be better off out too. Then the EU would unravel like the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union did back around 1990. I mean, not that I'm saying the EU is like the Warsaw Pact or the Soviet Union. Well, not so much. Anyway, the country voted to leave by more than 1 million votes. And at a meeting in Paris shortly afterwards, I got some friendly ribbing from my European colleagues. They weren't bothered, except for the Belgian, who was worried about the black hole, by which she meant the loss of the UK's funding towards the EU, much of which is based in Brussels. Now we're out, and membership of the EU is no longer an excuse for politicians. So, have they stepped up to the plate and taken responsibility themselves? Only joking. No, one lot are still saying our hands are tied by membership of other grand bodies like the ECHR, we should leave that, while others are now using Brexit as their excuse. We have an economically illiterate government, taxing jobs, handing out public sector pay rises, borrowing immense amounts. Inflation's up, everything's going to pot. And the Chancellor says all the problems her government created are caused by Brexit. No. Meanwhile, the EU regulation factory is powering ahead. We had GDPR, GPSR, and the last job I had before retiring from full-time work was a project to show that the firm I worked for was compliant with CSRD. And that meant long, boring meetings, lots of people going through long spreadsheets with expensive consultants guiding us. Also, we could say we were already doing what the regulation said. It must have cost a fortune and led to no change. It was just pointless effort. Now, some light regulation in these areas would be sensible, but the EU doesn't do light. It goes as heavy and complex as it can, as that makes more work for regulators and officials, as well as the consulting firms that are hired to get other firms through these processes. Mega corporations love all this regulation as they can afford all this red tape, while smaller firms can't. So regulation prevents smaller challenger firms from competing with the massive corporates. Do you think firms in America and Asia are bothering with all this regulation? Well, they have to if they want to export into the EU, so some, I think, will soon stop bothering. For the regulation industry is never going to stop. They're never going to say, okay, that's enough regulation, we're finished, you can make us all redundant. No, it's going to keep coming. Being outside the EU, we have to show compliance when we export our stuff to them, but when selling within the UK or to the rest of the world, we're now spared that massive overhead. Can you imagine having to prove your school jumble sale is CSRD compliant? So, would we be better off or worse off if we'd stayed in? Well, there's no way of knowing for sure, despite what people say. So it's worth looking at how those still in are faring. Are they powering ahead while poor old UK stumbles along behind? Well, although I've retired from full-time work, I'm sometimes asked back to help run international meetings. The last time I was in EU, about 6 months ago, a French colleague said to me, "France is finished." Now, that was before a former French president was sent to jail, before a French prime minister resigned after just 27 days in the job, only to be reappointed as they couldn't find anyone else, and before the country's crown jewels were pinched from the Louvre. France is finished because it is spending way beyond its means, even more than we are. Everyone knows it cannot last and the country will fail financially. But those doing well from all the free money today simply riot if their handouts are threatened. I love France, so it pains me to see this slow suicide. Mind you, we're treading the same path. And then Germany. Germany was the workshop of Europe, but it relied on cheap Russian energy, which it can't have now. And China can make all the things Germany does and much cheaper because China doesn't worry about net zero, fair pay, health and safety, environmental impact, or anything like that. So, how is Germany going to get by? I can't see what Germany's business model will be from now on, but I wish them well. Poland, Spain, and some of the others seem to be doing okay, but lots are struggling. Being in the EU isn't a guarantee of success, any more than being out of it means failure. It comes down to whether a country encourages innovation, enterprise, risk taking, and productive work, or doesn't. In the end, if you think having more politicians, officials, bureaucrats, and administrators is good, then you'll want to be part of the EU. If you think government should do the essentials and otherwise get out of the way, then you'll be doubtful of its benefits, as I was and still am. Now, before you leave, please click on the thumbs up, share, and subscribe buttons. Thanks.